What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? Early in the morning. Way, hey, and up she rises. Way, hey, and up she rises. Way, hey, and up she rises. Early in the morning. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Early in the morning. Way, hey, and up she rises. Way, hey, and up she rises. Way, hey, and up she rises. Early in the morning.
Okay, that's the watch down in the water then. As we repeat it, we will see. Shit. Move the back off. This, I've just discovered it on this one as well. This lever here, I'll try and do this. There we go. So, this lever here is the one that is the rate that the watch will. What better place then to introduce this Russian diving watch than here by the sea in the south of France. And here is that watch, the Vostok Amphibian. Now, my name is Richard Perrett. I'm a full-time watchmaker working in the United Kingdom, but currently down in the south of France for a few days, and thought it would be good to do a review on this watch that was actually sent to me by one of the guys who regularly watches my videos on this channel. So it's the Vostok Amphibian. It is a Russian made dive watch. It was made originally in the 1960s for the Russian Navy. It's similar to another watch that I have reviewed recently, which was the Vostok Kommandersky. In fact, that watch in many ways was an amphibian with Kommandersky livery, but this video is all about the amphibian and its waterproofing credentials, and we're going to take a really thorough kind of watchmaker's look at this watch. Okay, so here's the watch a little bit closer up now, and I'm actually going to deal with why the dial is coloured in the way it is at the end of this video, and it's quite an interesting story, but I shall leave it to the end. So what do we think of the Vostok Amphibia? Well, this watch is highly utilitarian and has some really quite elegant waterproofing features. As I described at the start, it was developed for the Russian Navy in the 1960s, and when I get it back to the watch bench back in the United Kingdom, I'm going to take it apart and I'll show you those features in some detail. There's quite a lot of school children behind me now, so hopefully you can still hear me above the chatter. So basic specifications of this watch. We have a case which is 41mm across and 48mm lug to lug. It is 15mm depth, and it's not unlike, as I said before, the one that I'm actually wearing on my wrist, which is the Kommandersky. The profile of the case is a little bit different, but the watches are actually very similar. So the bezel is bidirectional. It doesn't have any kind of clicking system, and this again apparently is a design feature. As the watch goes deeper in the water, the pressure against the bezel pushes the bezel into the watch, and that stops the bezel from turning. Personally, I find it difficult to live with. It feels a little bit cheap when you've had diving watches which have unidirectional bezels that actually click, and I'm unlikely to get the opportunity to take this watch down to 100 meters, so I don't really know how that particular mechanism works in practice, especially if you've got some big diving gloves on. And as with the Kommandersky, the crown on this watch is and the way it attaches to the stem is subtly different from most normal watches. So just taking the opportunity now to see how the keyless works operates, and so if we unscrew the crown is nice and wide, so it's quite easy to unscrew, and unlike most watches, as I say, the crown, when it is unscrewed from the pendant tube there, it doesn't pop out. Most of them are armed with a spring and pop out. Now with the Amphibian and the Kommandersky that I reviewed a while back, by design, deliberately, the crown is decoupled. Now that makes, from my perspective at least, the reseating of the crown on the pendant tube really easy. Okay, it's probably one of the easiest crowns to unscrew and then find its seat and screw back up that I have had the pleasure of using. Now actually that's quite an important thing, because you can have as much water protection on a watch as you like, but if you forget to screw the crown down, or you don't do it properly, then as soon as you get any pressure of water around it, it's going to find its way into the case, and that's the watch stopped working pretty much immediately, because the balance won't handle any water being in there. So let's now look at the keyless works. Of course, the crown is attached to the stem. We'll pull the stem out, just one click there. There is no calendar works with this watch, so there's just like one click out, and that engages the hands. It feels nice. There's enough tension there for you to set the hands accurately. Okay, one thing you want with a watch when you pull the stem out, you never want it to be too loose, because if it is, it's actually quite difficult to set the time accurately, and there's enough friction on that for that to be nice. So very simple keyless works. When we push it, let's just screw it back in. When we screw it out, in that first position there, okay, you can actually feel the watch is in winding position there, and attached to the stem there are two components. One is called a clutch, one is called a winding pinion, and if you listen carefully now, above the sound of the sea in the background there, you should be able to hear the clutch slipping back over the winding pinion, and a train and a train coming from Monaco back towards Nice. So just at the right time, as I'm trying to get you to listen to that. But as that disappears into the distance, you can hear now the watch winding, so that's nice. You unscrew it, you're in winding position immediately, you pull it out, you pull it out, and you can set the hands. Okay, maybe I'd like a little more friction there, but it's good enough. Okay, it's not bad at all. Okay, so screw the crown back on. As I say, the bezel is there's no click on it, and it is bidirectional. So the some people like it. I personally do not really think it's a great thing, but apparently you know, this works reasonably well, and it certainly was good enough for the Russian Navy, who know a great deal more about diving at depth than I do. So turning the watch over, we have an interesting case back here, and I'm going to show you this in more detail when I get back to the watch bench. And this again is a really good design feature for a watch which is designed to go into the water. Now, with a lot of watches that are dive watches, what you will see on the back is the case just screws straight in to the back, and the case has a thread on it, and the case back has a thread on it, and you literally just screw it down. Not so with the Amphibian. Now, and it's for a reason, and I'll show you in detail when we get back to the watch bench when I take this apart. But essentially we have a case back which locates in a certain position, and there are a couple of protrusions at the end which makes it really easy to slot in. That also has the benefit that you can see that the graphics on the back of the case here actually line up with the stem. Now, you know, that's very difficult to achieve if you just have a thread on there, because you never know quite when you're going to come to the correct torque on the case. So clearly that would just fall off if it wasn't held in place. But there is underneath that a dirty grey rubber gasket which is providing the seal. Then to put pressure downwards on it, you have this extra ring here which is threaded and inserts against the thread on the case. So as you turn that pushes down on the case back. It sits against this really nice big gasket, and that forms a really good water seal. So we've got the screw down crown, we've got the good water seal on the back, which I'm going to show you in detail when we're back in the United Kingdom on the watch bench. And we have got the next bit that I'm going to talk about, which is the crystal. Now, the crystal on this watch is actually a thing called lucite, and it looks to me at least a bit like the bottom of a beer glass. Now you might detect some disdain in what I'm saying there. Actually, quite the opposite. I rather like it. I think it looks quite retro and cool, and as you can see here, now I've chosen particularly good light to shoot this video in, but you can see that this is a really nice clear crystal, and as I say, it's got that kind of retro domed feel to it when you look at it in the profile there. It's reasonably scratch resistant. This is one I've had on my wrist which is similar. I don't know whether you'll catch the light. This is the Commandersky, and you can see there that there is now, I've been wearing this for about a month, and you can see that there are some scratches on the top. Luckily I'm a watchmaker, so when I want to swap that crystal out, I'll just do it. Coming back to the Amphibian, again, this is a really good feature for waterproofing, because the way in which this works is as the watch goes deeper, the pressure on the crystal becomes greater, and the way in which the crystal is shaped is such that it forces the crystal, pushes down on the middle here and forces the crystal into the case, and the crystal has got a degree of flex in it which actually forces the crystal into the case and actually helps improve the seal as the watch goes deeper. So again, that is a really elegant piece of design, and of course the same is true for the back. This will press harder against the gasket that I mentioned as the watch goes deeper. So in terms of you know, its diving credentials. This is a really business-like piece. In terms of its look, don't judge it by this style. This style is really interesting. As I say, I mentioned what it's all about at the end, but if you look at the pictures that are appearing on the screen now, you know, you get many different dial designs for this particular watch and this particular case design, which is the 090, as I mentioned. And you know, the watch can be made to look quite different from what you're seeing here, but this is an interesting version of it. So there we are. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to put this in the sea. I'm going to wear it swimming and do a few shots of that. Then when we've done that, actually it'll be time to go and get some tea then, so I'll go and do that. But then we're going to take the watch back to the United Kingdom. We're going to put it on the watch bench, and I'm going to take it apart, maybe not completely, but I'm going to take some interesting bits of it apart to show you guys what the movement's all about. So there we are, from the south of France here. There we go. Oh. So there we are. So there we are from the south of France here on a lovely early summer's afternoon. That is the analysis, at least, of the outside of this watch. What we're going to do now, as I say, is take it back to UK and have a really detailed look at it. Okay, so here we are now actually in the sea with the Vostok Amphibian. So, as I say, in its natural environment, and we can pop it down in the water here. And you know, I did this when I reviewed the Invicta Pro Diver last year, and you know, exactly the same thing. I've been swimming around the bay with this watch, and you know, totally confident that this watch will keep out the water. It's going to have no issue at all running, because you know, we're not at any depth here, and when I get it back to UK, I'm going to stick it in the pressure tester and test it down to 60 meters. Okay, you know, I promise you guys a shot of the watch in the water. Sadly, I don't have an underwater camera. If you guys want to go to Patreon and sponsor me for $2 a month, maybe if I get enough guys, I'll get an underwater camera and take this and other dive watches down properly underwater. So there we are. There's a quick plug for the channel. Anyway, let's get this watch back to UK and get it on the watch bench. And here we are then, back in UK. Thank you very much, EasyJet, for a nice flight, and time to get these watches back to the watch bench. Let's do it. As you can see, I have set up the Vostok Amphibian here in the same apparatus that you saw the Invicta Pro Diver fail so spectacularly at the start of this video. So I have pumped this up to 60 meters worth of water pressure. So the air pressure inside the air pocket at the top there is equivalent to 60 meters worth of water pressure. Now, if there are any compromises to the case that you can see there, and you can see the hand ticking around there nicely at the moment, if there are any leaks at all, then the pressure inside of the watch will also be at 60 meters worth of water pressure. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drop the watch down into the water, which is harder to do than you think actually, because, and there it is down in the water. Now the air pressure inside the watch is hopefully at atmospheric pressure, but if there is a leak in it, it will be at 60 meters worth of water pressure. So when we release that pressure from the top using this little white button here, if there has been a leak, you will see what you saw with the Invicta at the start of the program, and it will manifest itself with a load of bubbles pouring out in a reasonably sustained way, depending of course on how big or small the leak is. So anyway, we are now gonna let the pressure go and see if this watch can stand the 60 meters worth of water pressure. Now it should, because this is a dive watch, and I am going to show you in a minute the features, the engineering features of this watch that make it such a good dive watch. And there is famous last words, but as gently as I can now, I'm going to release the pressure from the air pocket at the top. So let's just come in as I do that and get nice and close to the watch. There we go, just holding that as gently as I may, just propping that up there. Okay, we are ready to go. Let's release the pressure. Okay, now you saw some bubbles come out there, and there are a few still lingering. That, my friends, is trapped air underneath the bezel. That was not a leak inside the watch. How can we tell? Well, apart from anything else, if water had got inside the watch, there would be the second hand would not be turning, because it would have got onto the balance, and that would stop it immediately. And the other thing is, there was very, very little of it, so just a little bit of trapped air under the bezel. But guys, this watch is good to 60 meters. Okay, so having unsurprisingly passed the pressure test, I've got the Amphibian now on the watch bench here, and I just want to show you the design of the case back that makes it really, really good for underwater use at high pressure. Now, you remember that I mentioned that there was this extra ring, and I've taken the tension off it. So if we just turn that round now with a piece of pegwood like that, just to free it up until it goes completely loose and I can take it away. That should be it. Okay, there we go. You can see that this ring is the thing that puts pressure down onto the case back here. Now, of course, when the sea pressure or the water pressure gets greater than the pressure that the ring is exerting on the case back, the water pressure starts to do the case back's job, and it will push back hard on the case here, and all that does is make it even more watertight. Now you can see with these droplets of water that I have just taken it out of the pressure tester. I'm actually just going to wipe that over real quick now so we don't accidentally flick any water into the movement as we take this case back off, and to reveal the Vostok 2415 movement, which is a movement without a date complication. Now if I just spin this round here, you can see that there is right here this little extension to the case that fits into this notch, or rather extension to the case back that fits into this notch here. So if we just now to get underneath that with the right size screwdriver, so if I come in with one about like that, okay, and just insert that there, give that a little bit of a flick upwards very gently, because I don't know quite where the balance is underneath here, so just flick that up. Voila, there is the movement, and the first thing you see, of course, is that dirty great big gasket. Okay, so, and here we have it. Now, you know, a lot of watches have little O-ring gaskets and stuff like that, but check this bad boy out. This is the waterproofing gasket here, which I am pointing out. And because of the case design, what happens, as I've mentioned, is as the pressure of the water gets greater, this pushes this part of the case back against this gasket here. And so the watch gets more and more watertight. That, my friends, is elegant design. So let's, while we've got this case open, let's have a little look at the movement that Vostok have provided for us for this watch. And to do that, actually, I think I am going to take this out of the case completely so I can have a proper look at it. So I'm going to do that now and rejoin the video when I have the movement on a movement stand. Okay, and just before we remove the movement, I just went in with my loop to do that. And what struck me is the size of this gasket all the way around. Look how thick that waterproofing gasket is. And so, you know, this, guys, is serious waterproofing for the back of this watch, and elegant, as I say, because, you know, the more the water pressure exerts on the back, the more the back is forced into this great big black gasket. Anyway, let's get this nice little movement out now. Okay, so just lining up the camera here to get a better shot of the movement, and as I was doing so, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the box. And so I'm going to show you the box for this watch now. Ta-da! Here is the box. Guys, the box is rubbish. I don't know why the Russians do this. I mean, this is just not really very good at all. It has paperwork. It has paperwork. The watch has paperwork. It's all in Russian, I think. Yep. Pretty much all in Russian. So unless, Здравствуйте, your Russian is very good, that's not going to be much use to you. Anyway, so there's the box for what it's worth. Box is rubbish. Okay. Oh, while I'm about that, actually, been looking at some fake Rolexes at the moment, and some of them are getting so good that I think the only way pretty soon to tell a real Rolex from a fake one is to smell the box, because the box on the real Rolex is so good. Anyway, I digress. Let's focus in on the Did I actually go on about smelling boxes there? I'm sure that's I'm not even sure that's rude. I don't know. Anyway, whoa, focus. Let's focus back in on this watch by Vostok and actually coming in there a little bit closer so I can point out some stuff here for you. Okay, well, some of the stuff here is basic and straightforward that you'll recognize already. What I've done is I've come into the movement and I've lifted off the automatic works bridge. I want to call it a bridge, well, because it really is a bridge actually. Let me just show you that here. So I've lifted off this bridge here. Now, unlike a lot of watches, most calibers, I want to say that, when you lift off the automatic works, they come as a module. Okay, so pretty much all the automatic works lift off the movement as one. Not so with this Vostok. You can see here the two reversing wheels. Here's one reversing wheel. Here is the other reversing wheel. The purpose of these is so that regardless of which way the rotor turns, and the rotor, or the oscillating weight as its proper name is this component here, regardless of which direction that spins in, it will put power on the train, and that is the purpose of these two reversing wheels, and they drive around this wheel here, which puts through some other pinions power on to the spring, which is under this wheel here, and this wheel is called the ratchet wheel. Okay, now, so what do I think about that? I think the operation is fine. I just, as a watchmaker, I prefer it when it all comes off as one. I don't know whether that's OCD. It's just nice to be able to say, right, I've got the automatic works off, let's give them a good clean and put them back. The distinction in this movement between the automatic works and the rest of the powertrain is blurred. Let us say that. Okay, let's have a look at some other things here. The one other thing that I do want to mention. Okay, here is the balance. You can see it spinning away nicely. If I remember rightly, it spins at 19,800 beats per minute. You can see the finish on the balance cock here and all across the movement isn't aesthetically pleasing. It is just, you know, standard utilitarian stuff, but it is accurate. And you know, it is nicely designed. The only thing that I would mention, and I discovered this on the Kommanderski actually a few days ago, is that this, I've just discovered it on this one as well, this lever here, I'm going to try and do this without the loop and through the camera, so if there's a big crunch in a minute, no, we're good. So this lever here is the one that dictates the rate that the watch will beat at, because if you move it this direction, it is making the hairspring shorter, and if you pull it back in this direction, it's making it longer. If you make the hairspring shorter, the balance beats quicker. If you make it longer, it beats slower. So that's how you set the rate. Now, just slightly worryingly, this one is a little bit loose. So if you knock the watch at all, if I just nudge it, it's not loose enough to, it does actually move the movement if I nudge it, because I've only got one hand here. But anyway, I found it was a little bit looser than I would ideally like. And I think if you give the watch a really good knock, there's a chance that you might find that the rate of the watch changes. And that's not ideal, because unless you know what you're doing, then you know, you're in a bit of a pickle there, because you've got to open the watch up and start messing around with this stuff. And if you don't know what you're doing with that, that's a little bit dangerous. This lever here is the one that puts the watch in beat, and that is much firmer and was much firmer in the Kommanderski as well. So that's good. Just some other things real quick. Try and get that in focus. This is the crown wheel here and the click. This is a very classic design of clicks, so there's not going to be any problem with that. The crown wheel is nice and big and chunky. The ratchet wheel is nice and big and chunky. It's also got this nice kind of starburst effect on it, which is, you know, not utilitarian. That's actually quite attractive. So all in all, a nice business-like utilitarian movement with functional automatic works that work nicely but aren't distinct as a module from the rest of the movement, which I as a watchmaker would prefer, but most people really couldn't give a monkey's about. So that is a look at the movement. Okay, so we've had a really good in-depth look at this watch now, and as a result I'm going to come up with some scores for it, and they're going to be done in the normal. Okay, so let's give the scores now for this amphibian watch by Vostok, and I am going to start by doing a quick loom check, because we've not talked about the loom yet. So let's turn the light off, and that light is quite interesting, and as you can see, the loom on the hands is pretty bright, but the loom around the dial not so bright. But then we've also got quite a lot of ambient light here, so you know, it's really difficult to tell. What I'm going to do is give the scores now with the light in this condition, and then we will decide on how faint the loom has got by the end and give it a score. So we're going to look at engineering and build quality first, then we're going to decide how beautiful or not this watch is, and then lastly we'll look at the value for money. So firstly, engineering and build quality, and I want to talk first about the movement. Now, we've just had a detailed look at the movement. You know, I like these Russian movements. They're not hugely refined. They do not have many features. For example, this 2415 movement, Bravo movement, I noticed when I actually took it apart there, that does not have a hacking feature, so you cannot stop the second hand, which does make setting the watch accurately a little bit difficult. And I know there are some sort of hacks that you can do for this, but they're just not convenient. You kind of have to practice them to get good at them, and the whole idea of having a hacking movement is just to make it easy. So the movement loses a bit for lack of features, but it does have resilience and reliability on its side, notwithstanding what I said about the regulation lever, which I think on two of these watches of similar types now that I've seen is maybe a little bit loose. Now, summing all of that lot together, I gave the movement a score of 7 out of 10. The case for this watch is designed to do a particular job. We've tested it down to 60 meters. I know that it will go a lot further than that. You can look at other videos on YouTube where people test it down to some quite extraordinary depths. This case is really, really good for the job that it does. It has some amazing features, not least of which this massive grey waterproof gasket you can see, and the press down back that is with the special retention ring that I mentioned earlier. This is a really, really good case, and I'm going to give it 9 out of 10. Likewise, because this is a dive watch, I'm also going to give the crystal 9 out of 10. Now, the crystal, lucite crystal, as I mentioned, is particularly designed to improve water resistance at high pressure, and it also looks kind of cool, kind of retro cool when it's out of the water, which it will be most of the time, and it gives a very clear view of the dial. So I'm going to give that, as I say, 9 out of 10. We're going to look at the lume towards the end. In fact, no, let's actually judge the lume now, because I don't know what you think, but I'm pretty sure that whilst I've been talking here, there is no real lume left there. I think it's gone. If I just turn the light back on and back off again, you will see that the lume has been refreshed. But guys, it doesn't stay like that long. Okay, so I think the lume is a little bit rubbish. So I'm actually going to give it 6 out of 10. And lastly, oh no, not lastly, there's 2 more things for the engineering build quality. I'm going to look at the keyless works. They're quite simple on this. There is no calendar function, so there's no rapid date change or anything like that. There's also no hacking, as I've mentioned. So it's really just setting the hands and winding the watch. It does this reasonably well, although I thought the setting of the hands was a little bit loose on this. So I've given it the benefit of the doubt, and I've scored it a 7 out of 10. And lastly, the bracelet. Guys, I didn't talk about the bracelet, but let's just grab it here now. The bracelet is actually a little bit rubbish. I don't know whether you can see it, but it's folded links and pressed metal. It's very, very cheap. Guys, the bracelets don't come much sort of tinier than this one here. So I am going to score the bracelet, I'm afraid, a 5, or that's actually quite comfortable, I suppose. It's comfortable, but it is cheap. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It hasn't fallen off, at least, and I did wear the watch for some time whilst I was in the south of France. So those are the scores for the engineering build quality, and I will total those up in a minute for the final result. Now, turning to looks. Now, what I want you to do now is just take a look at some of these pictures which are appearing on the screen now, done by my good friend Marcos, who is very lucky to have one of the classic 1967 versions of this watch. Now that watch does have a really lovely bracelet, but it comes in at more like $500. Okay, but you know, you just look at these images in terms of potential. You know, guys, this is a watch that scrubs up. You know, you get the right dial on it and the right bracelet. It hasn't got that Submariner thing going on. It has its own individual identity. And I don't like the bezel much, but we're not talking about function here. We're talking about looks. So, you know, this watch has its own identity. It's pretty cool. Do you know, I'm going to give it 8.5 out of 10. That is a pretty good score, I think, for this watch. Now, lastly, let's wrap the whole thing up then and talk about value for money. We have got here a dive watch. It can go down deep. You can see it is built for action. It was built for the Soviet Navy and it's still being built in Russia now. It's a serious piece of engineering with a nice little robust movement. And guys, it comes in a rubbish box, but it does come for about $60. So what can I say in terms of value for money? And I've been doing this recently quite a lot, but then I am reviewing watches that people want, but then I am reviewing watches that people want me to review because of this very issue, I believe. People want me to review this watch because they think it is really good value for money. And guys, I agree. It is. It gets a 10 out of 10 for sure. It is such a useful piece of kit which is potentially stylish and costs about $60 right there. So that's it. Let's now sum up all the scores for this and see where we are with the Amphibian before I tell you why the dial is coloured in this strange red and white sector. In this strange red and white sectors there on the dial. So let's total up the scores and then get into that. So then the final scores for this Amphibian watch. And the engineering build quality, when you work out the average there, that works out to 7.3 out of 10, which is really let down by the bracelet and the lume. So if you're not interested too much in lume and you put a good bracelet on it, then you know that would lift that score up significantly. But 7.3 out of 10 is not shabby at all. That is a good solid score. The looks I've dealt with, that's an 8 out of 10, and the value for money, a resounding 10 out of 10. So when you total that lot up, the final score for this really resilient piece by Vostok is a very, very respectable 8.4 out of 10. So one more thing to do now then, and that is just to talk very quickly about this dial. Let me just see if I can grab it here. Okay, and spin it over. And here then is that interesting dial, and let's see if we can get a little bit closer. That's better. So yeah, now you will notice that in the 3 minutes after each of the quarter of an hour, the area is shaded off red, and that is because of an important piece of maritime history. Now, after the sinking of the Titanic, which I think was in 1912, the global maritime authorities got together and they really sharpened up their act on how a ship should have the best chance possible to get any distress call out to other vessels. And what it was decided was that during these periods, nobody was to transmit any traffic on the radio network, on the emergency channel, at those times. So the whole network would go quiet at those times. That meant that if you were found yourself in a tricky situation on the high seas and you had to get a message out, you knew that nobody else would be on send on a particular channel, and I think the channel was 500 kilohertz. If you know better than that because you're an expert in these things, then please let us know in the comments. But that's the reason for this dial. Now, in ships' radio rooms, you would have a clock like this. It needed to be accurate because clearly it needed to be synced with all the other clocks that were on ships floating around in the ocean there. And certainly if you come up on a radio and started talking, you know, about how many packets of or sacks of potatoes you needed to take on board, you know, when you came into port, or something mundane like that, during the time when the minute hand was inside one of these red areas, you would very quickly be told to become silent and get off the radio network. Anyway, that then is the reason for this dial. That's a nice piece of history, I think, to finish with. So guys, if you like my channel, let me just pop the watch back there and come back out. There we go, guys. If you like my channel, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and why not subscribe? I'm making a lot of content at the moment, and so there will be more videos coming your way very soon. I'm a lucky chap. I get to do what I really love doing, and I also get to share it with everyone on my YouTube channel. So guys, please subscribe. Please check me out on Patreon if you want to support me in this work. That would be much appreciated also. But tonight, I think, you know, can feel reasonably happy that we've had a really good look at this watch. And guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it. But tonight, from Perrett Dock, not so far away from the high seas ourselves here on the west coast of Wales in the United Kingdom. Guys, that's all I've got for you. So good night and God bless.